Today, the second speaker for today's session is Dr. Surekha Deshmukh. Dr. Surekha Deshmukh technical expertise in providing sustainable solutions to power and energy sector, energy market risk management, portfolio optimization, reliability evaluation, techno-commercially viable real-time balancing mechanism, performance management, uncertainty estimation of renewable sector, and strategic participation in trading electric vehicular technology. We welcome you, ma'am. The moderator for today's session is Ms. Charu Agarwal. As a senior program lead at CEW, Charu leads the power market workstream focusing on utility reforms and demand-side management. She uses data to study the changing energy landscape and devise strategies to ensure universal access to affordable, reliable, and sustainable energy. She is an alumni of University of College London and IIT Roorkee. We welcome you, ma'am. The next speaker for today is Mr. Alex Kamau Wachira. Mr. Wachira is equipped with a wealth of knowledge and experience from the private sector where he served as an investment banker. Mr. Wachira has served in various leadership positions right from his university days. He was a founding member of the Bonds Market Association as well as a member of the steering committee of the Kenya Association of Stocks Broker and Investment Banker. We welcome you, sir. The next speaker for today is Mr. Markus Merkel. Markus Merkel is Senior Advisor to the Board of Management of NETZ GmbH, an innovative German DSO. He's a member of the European Union Task Force Smart Grid Workgroup 3 since 2011, member of the German Platform for Sustainable Energy Network, Working Group Intelligent Network and Metering, German member and co-chair of the Euro Electric Working Group on Distribution System Design. Markus holds 2 university degrees, one in mechanical engineering and another in Master of Business Administration. Between 2012 and 14, he has worked on job as consultant advisor and later as German expert on a study and regulation pathways for smart grid development in China. We welcome you, sir. The next speaker for today is Mr. Pramod Singh. With an experience of more than 28 years in power and infrastructure sector across the breadth of responsibilities in corporate strategy, business development, policy, and regulatory affairs, power sales and techno-commercial management, Pramod Singh is presently heading the regulatory and commercial business in India Power. At BSES, he held responsibilities in corporate management level in various programs covering development of power generation, distribution, and EPC job. He also worked in North Delhi Power Limited and was very actively involved in the revival and restructuring of the electricity distribution scenario in North and Northwest Delhi. We welcome you, sir. So with this, we are final. All speakers are available with us, and now I hand over to the moderator to take the session continue forward. Over to you, ma'am.
Hello. Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Saad. Really happy to see you all here. I'm Charu Agarwal, your moderator for the session. I'm sure over the past 2 days you've heard many different ways in which utilities are thinking about engaging with their consumers, digitalizing their assets, but also becoming more resilient to increasing climate risk. Today in this session we have many experienced leaders from the utility sector from whom we'll like to hear about how they are viewing the energy transition journey for their own companies and the countries that they lead. Right, before before we get into that, I just want to unpack a little about, we hear the word net zero quite often. Utility sector has been a very dynamic one. New technology developments have been happening and the sector has evolved over many decades. But we have a new driver that is really changing the course of how the sector is evolving today, and that is the net zero commitments that the countries are making. And net zero in like layman's term is basically, a future where we will be balancing the emissions that come out of the source or the anthropogenic emissions with the emissions that are absorbed by the sinks. It's easier said than done because it will require really reimagining the future or the world that we live in will probably not exactly look the same. It's difficult to imagine, which is why we keep trying just making incremental changes, but that's how progress happens. And so far we have 140 countries who have already committed or are considering commitments to the net zero targets, including India, which has announced that it will achieve a net zero emissions by 2070. And indeed, in all of this, the power sector will play a pivotal role, given that majority of today's emissions come from overall power sector. And as we do so, there are three important trends that we see that will happen, which indicate like the opportunities as well as the challenges that the sector will have to face. The first one is, without doubt, the utility operations will grow because a lot of electrification will happen as we see more end users on industry, cooking, or even transport moving to electricity from their current fuels. The utilities will have to adapt to a new energy mix. We have heard a lot about it, with renewables becoming the dominant source of electricity, and we have the largest utility player representative who are also now moving into this segment, and we'll hear from them. And utilities will have to transform the way they work to service new consumer categories. This is one of the hardest nut to crack as well, because it will really disrupt the way our utilities function today. My colleagues at CW did a small, actually a very intensive modeling exercise to envision how a net zero future may look like. And we used climate energy modeling to see how the transition could happen over the course of the century. And this is a slide that shows two things. One, the electricity demand grows multifold. So in a business as usual scenario, we expect that India's electricity demand could grow sixfold just by 2070. But if we are to pursue a net zero future, that will become double. That shows the opportunity that we have at hand, that there is a growing business opportunity for different players in the sector. But at the same time, we know that future electricity demand will be served through solar. So just in India, we expect 60 to 70% of electricity coming just from solar as one technology by 2070, which again will force the change in the way our grid system operates or our utilities operate. So with that, let me now invite our keynote speaker, Mr. Mohit Bhargav, to share with us how India's largest utility, NTPC, is thinking about its net zero journey, what sustainability initiatives they are taking, and what does he think about the pace and the nature of transition that will take place. Mr. Bhargav.
Good afternoon. First and foremost, thank you to World Utility Summit, Mr. Gandotra, for having me here. So, sustainability, I think, is what you mentioned, what we are doing about sustainability, and then you also mentioned about net zero. So, these are things which I find very difficult to understand in general as a concept. So, it's kind of difficult for me to actually start telling what we are doing, because we are doing a lot of things, and we were actually discussing before this session briefly with Charu as to what all NTPC is doing. So, in terms of sustainability, I think I don't need to repeat what the country set itself for. At Glasgow last year, the Honorable Prime Minister did set very, very ambitious targets, one of them being net zero 2070, by 2070. There, of course, are, I think, much more important targets, because we feel that 2070 being where it is, none of us would be there, I believe, in 2070 to actually ensure that the targets are met. But what we need to do in this decade by 2030, what we need to do immediately are the more important targets of what the Prime Minister said there. One of which was to reduce the emissions by 1 billion tons by 2030. That, I believe, is a very, very important target, because that is something which, while all the countries, and Charu said 140 countries have given targets for net zero, but I don't think any one of them have actually given targets which are short term, near term, which we can all live to see and feel that yes, it was done or not done. So 1 billion ton reduction by 2030, reducing our carbon intensity by 45%, yes, that we can do. So one of my pet peeves, if I may use the word peeves with net zero, has been everyone says net zero, but we don't define net zero. And I understand the agencies concerned are actually trying to put on paper what will net zero mean in terms of commitments. Like what India did, I'll reduce my carbon emissions by so much, I'll reduce my carbon intensity by so much, I will set up at least 50% capacity from non-fossil sources by 2030. So these are concrete measurable targets. So I'm not sure how many other countries have given these kind of targets, but it's important that when we talk about net zero, we have targets which are measurable, we have targets which we can hold them to. And particularly a lot of friends here from outside India, I think what was decided in 2012 hasn't happened up till now in terms of putting money on the table. And what we said in 2017, I believe, that we'll do so much capacity by 2030, we actually did in 2021. We said we'll do more than 40% capacity from renewables by 2030, we did it in 2021. So it's important to set targets which are achievable. It's important to also ensure that the targets can be measured and achieved. So for me, that's why I said net zero remains something which is a very grey, opaque kind of thing which we need to clarify as we move forward so that we can hold people accountable. Ultimately, net zero in itself is derived because we are all concerned about the environment, we are all concerned about the planet. Whether it's 1.5 degree, whether it's 2 degree, it's important to take all steps possible today that we don't land ourselves in a situation which is irretrievable, which is why net zero becomes important. So that was the net zero part. So now what NTPC is doing, and I think Shalu introduced me by saying that the largest utility, yes, in India we are the largest. And if I may add with humbly that as NTPC, we have probably embarked on one of the most ambitious energy transition projects in the country, definitely I know. Globally, also maybe there would be very few companies who have actually set for themselves these targets. So our ambition for energy transition, incidentally, we don't have a net zero target as of now, but we have engaged Niti Aayog to help us do that. So they are in the process of trying to formulate the framework and how we can arrive at a number and what we can do to achieve that. So what we have tried to do is our energy transition is based on multiple pillars, if I may say so. The most important pillar of that is to create renewable capacity. Today NTPC has an installed capacity of about 71 gigawatts, and out of that about 51, 52 gigawatts is actually coal-based capacity. So we of course supply almost a quarter of the power of the country. What we have set for ourselves is that by 2032 we'll have renewable capacity of 60 gigawatts, which would be broadly equivalent to the coal-based capacity also at that point of time. So we want to create renewables capacity which is almost as big in size, and if I put it in terms of investment, so we are talking about an energy transition high-level investment of the order of about $45 billion in the next 8 to 9 years, which is significant because as one entity, and when I say NTPC, I am also including NTPC Green Energy Limited or NTPC Renewables, which are part of NTPC's stable and the vehicles through which we are trying to do these things. It's a huge number. If I convert that into rupees crores, it's about 3 lakh 50 or 60,000 crores. That is the kind of number we're talking about in terms of investment. And this is broadly the number we are talking about what we'll invest in the renewable sector alone. But this, while this is the most important pillar of what we're trying to do, energy transition is not limited to this alone. What we're also trying to do is in terms of clear commitments on water and biodiversity conservation, clear commitment in terms of circular economy, clear commitment in terms of reducing emissions, creating carbon sinks, clear commitment in terms of ultimately helping our suppliers also become part of the net zero plan or in terms of the emissions. We are also looking at how we can be providing a transition which is not only good for NTPC, but which is just. So these are all pillars of how we are looking at, and I am not mentioning here energy conservation, because that in any case is given for companies like NTPC. We are continuously working on that. We have already achieved all the targets we had set for ourselves under PAT scheme, and we are also working very closely onto the second cycle of PAT. So these are all important for us, that as we move forward, we are looking at things which become not only practical and doable, but which are also key into as we go forward. What we also did was, globally, we started doing things which were clearly measurable. So we are probably the first energy major in the world who signed the Energy Compact with the UN, thereby clearly articulating what we will do. So 60 gigawatt is part of that target. That is a commitment not only to ourselves, but that's also a target to the world, that we will do 60 gigawatts of renewables. We will reduce our carbon intensity by a certain number in the next 8 to 9 years. So that is also a clear commitment. We also started partnering. Of course, there are global agencies, part of which we are also now Global Alliance for Sustainable Energy, which is also how we are looking at, we do things, we bring people together in terms of how technology can be brought into the country. We are not a technology developer. NTPC, while we have a small dedicated research and development team, but our focus is on doing projects, delivering power. That is where we focus on. We also have focus in terms of how we can actually decarbonize our fossil fuel portfolio. And when I say that, I'll probably take a minute to explain. We have started co-firing of biomass into our boilers. The whole idea began when, for people who live in Delhi would have seen the kind of pollution we face in Delhi the year long, and it becomes really intense in September, October when the farm fires start. So our focus is to use this agro residue, get it converted into pellets and burn them into our boilers. So we have already actually placed orders for close to 5 million tons of these pellets. The challenge now, of course, is while the people have taken the orders, they are still taking more time to deliver. But we are quite hopeful that this will actually ultimately become a movement, which will not only help Delhi in general, which will also create avenues for the agriculture, the farmers, who otherwise burn this residue between the two crops and try to move quickly on to the next crop. So that's what we are doing. We also recently commissioned a municipal solid waste to charcoal project. It's a demonstration project in Varanasi where we are converting municipal solid waste into charcoal. And it's practically a new technology which we are trying to do here. We have good Indian partners working with us there. The idea is that if we can convert the municipal solid waste, it takes care of the MSW problem in practically every city we have in the country. We know the Ghazipur landfill and the Bhalaswa landfill, but I am sure this is something which is very common in many cities across the country. So we are bringing here and trying to establish a technology which can convert this. So that's another way, because once we are producing charcoal from municipal solid waste and firing to boiler, that is charcoal. You can use it for making tandoori rotis if you want, or you can burn it in the boiler. So that's green. That's totally green. We also started a project on carbon capture and utilization. So that's a very strong buzzword across the world for, I would say, for decades. The Western experts, if I may use the word, they have been trying to say that CCUS is the way to go. One of the major questions we have been asking them is, CCU we agree, carbon capture utilization, but storage is something we can't understand, because I don't think we have safe storage facility for the amount of carbon dioxide we capture on an annual basis. So we feel it's much more important to capture the carbon dioxide and convert it into something useful. So what we are trying to do at one of our projects in Vindhyachal is use this captured carbon dioxide and along with green hydrogen, convert it into methanol. Methanol is a product which is very easily used in many applications across the country. Incidentally, India imports almost 90% of the methanol we do today. So it could also become a source of replacing the imports and becoming Atmanirbhar in the production and supply of methanol. That is what we think we can do, carbon capture and utilization, so that we don't have to look at storage as an option. That is something we want to, once we are able to demonstrate it clearly, we will be able to probably make it happen in other places also. So if we are looking at what NTPC is doing, the whole idea is not to be focused on one area, because we feel that as a country, India will need coal-based power for a significant amount of time. While we have today, for example, issued the largest tender for energy storage, 3 gigawatt hour, which we are planning to finalize by the end of next month, the cost of storage and the ultimate cost of power, as we look at, will still be quite high. So storage-based power will probably take some more time to become mainstream. So we feel that till then the role of coal will remain in the country, which is why we are focused on ensuring that how we can make that coal cleaner, less emission free. We are totally committed to achieving all the targets of SOx and NOx reductions, for which we are probably the only company who have placed all the orders, and work is in progress. So that is another thing which we feel that if we are looking at sustainability, it has to straddle the entire gamut of our operations. It has to ultimately go down to our suppliers. It has to ultimately go down to the community, which is part of our overall stakeholder group. So we are quite keen to take that forward. I think that about sums up what we are trying to do, and I'll be happy to take questions as we go along. Just one or two points on what the government has done and how we are part of that. I believe there are 2 or 3 critical components of the government's thrust on energy transition. Mobility, of course, you mentioned, that's definitely one. Green hydrogen probably is one of the biggest and I think one of the most exciting prospects which the government is talking about in terms of how ultimately decarbonization can happen across the sector. And this is where I slightly differ from what Charu showed at the beginning. When we talk about net zero, everyone focuses on power sector. We are just a medium. Ultimately, there are people or industries who emit much more emissions. We don't have a choice. I mean, either we decide we live with much lesser power, which is not possible today, but if we have to provide power, we probably have to live with coal or gas, whatever we have. And I don't agree with the generally exported idea that gas is a transition fuel. Gas is a transition fuel only in places where gas is available. In India, gas is not a choice. If I have to start using gas to produce power, the power bills in everyone's homes will go up by, I don't know, 2x, 3x, and then we'll all start feeling that why we are doing it. So the choice made by the government is very clear. We will use whatever we have till the time we need to do. On one side, we have clearly articulated the need for having 500 gigawatts of non-fossil based capacity by 2030. Equally, we are saying we need to ensure that people get power at a reasonable cost. We are not saying we will give them cheap, but it should be reliable, affordable power at reasonable cost. And that is why all the steps to make it sustainable. The other part is that when we do renewables, we also look at various other aspects, because the influx of so much renewables will lead to instability in the grid. And Mr. Baba is sitting here who knows the grid much better than, what I know or what I can even think of knowing. Already with 170 gigawatts, out of which almost 110 gigawatts is variable renewables, we face issues in terms of how the grid smoothening, and so we have backing down on the renewable side also today because of various reasons. We also have issues of reactive power. So we feel that one of the important things which will also start falling on the thermal power plants is in terms of flexing their fleet. So which is what NTPC has already started working on. All our power stations, the entire fleet of NTPC can actually operate at 55%, which is the current mandate. In fact, we have worked with various, Mr. Gandotra is from Siemens, of course not Siemens Energy, but your team has worked with us at Dadri, and also we worked with other agencies at Ramagundam to very clearly establish that our power plants can go down to 40%, and the ramp rates can be over 3%. So I am being slightly technical here, but please don't ask me questions on this. I'll direct that to Mr. Baba. So the whole idea is that the grid is stable, seamless, smooth, and we can meet the requirement of everyone, because electricity or electrons is a commodity which is unlike any other commodity. So you have to be very clear on how you make that things happen. So flexibility is another area where in terms of sustainability, I might say, that's an important step which NTPC has taken. And we are working very closely with the government and the regulator to ensure that from 55 to 40 also happens. Obviously, appropriate compensation will need to be given to the generating companies, but it needs to happen, because when you're talking about 400 odd gigawatts of renewable coming into the grid by 2030, this will become almost mandatory for all the power stations to flex. So, probably I'll stop here. I think I don't know whether I've overshot my time. So, thank you so much once again. I'll be happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bhargav. Just clarifying, the gas is a transition fuel. You're referring not from power perspective, but from industry perspective for the heat process heat. But clear takeaway from you that the targets should be measurable and achievable. And with that, let me invite Dr. Surekha Deshmukh to talk about how utilities can really raise their ambitions and what kind of frameworks can they use to plan a clear sort of journey to become more sustainable.
Good afternoon to one and all. I'm very happy that this session we started with demonstrating different initiatives of NTPC, which is the India's largest, biggest utility industry. And the way Mr. Bhargav has narrated different initiatives, it has boosted the morale, it has given us a confidence that yes, we are on a very right path towards sustainability. Because just post pre-lunch, when we had energetic and electrifying session by our Honorable Minister, Mr. Piyush Goyal ji, you will find this particular session of mine is a kind of extension of the thought leadership presented by him in terms of sustainability pathway, sustainability movement, decarbonization, circular economy, circular business. And that's exactly is rather narrated by Mr. Bhargav in his keynote speech. So what I would like to present to you is an overarching point of view around sustainability from utility industry point of view. Now, we all are aware of industry 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, 4.0 kind of a transformation across industry verticals. And utility industry, which is an electrical industry, which is very typical industry where our commodity is a live commodity where you generate, transmit, distribute and consume in real time. I'm just keeping storage component aside. Where we also are in the same race and in the same expectations as per sustainability pathway is concerned, as per net zero targets are concerned, as per our commitment towards environment, safety, governance, etc. is concerned. That's one of the reasons when we speak from utility standpoint, I just wanted to present to you the typical terminologies that we come across industries, including utility industry. The typical terminologies over here are downstream activities, core activities, upstream activities. And Mr. Bhargav also has mentioned about including supply chain and talking to them about their own net zero carbon. Because as a commodity, it's an ecosystem who is rather contributing towards entire carbon emission and a carbon footprint. And that's why if we really need to put some sort of a target and achieve those targets, it's a responsibility of individual person and an entity in that ecosystem to contribute to their own percentage. And that's one of the reasons whenever we would like to understand the sustainability pathway, there are certain important aspects. I would touch base on those aspects. However, for every aspect, you will find there are certain upstream activities which are involved. There are certain core activities and functions that are involved pertaining to that utility industry. And similarly, there is a downstream stakeholders connected to that entire value chain. That's one. Second, here we abide by accounting for scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emission. And then here by assessing and quantifying scope 1, 2, 3, you really need to have a dialogue with all these stakeholders, starting from upstream core and downstream activity. So in short, for utility industry, to me, which are the major verticals or sectors where we need to focus on is one, environmental footprint. As a utility industry, whether I'm a generation company or a transmission company or a distribution company or a retail company, I really need to know my own contribution towards environmental footprint. Second, I really need to try to enhance decarbonization. The way sir has given examples of what are different initiatives and practices that they are undergoing at NTPC to decarbonize, similarly, every entity has to try out for decarbonization attempts. Third one is most important in case of electricity utility is to minimize loss, pollution, leakage in every stage of the value chain. Fourth, which is again very important, is usage of the assets which get spread across the value chain and aging of infrastructure. That is something which again contributes to the environmental impact. And most important is materiality driven aspects. The materiality driven aspect is nothing but what we call as who are there, who are the players in utility. People are the players in utility. So it's a kind of a synergy and a presence of people, plant, technology, data, and advancement in technology. So all of them are over there, and that's why pertaining to each of them, there are materiality driven aspects which we have to focus on. And the last, which is most important pointer under sustainability is circular economy, increasing circularity, traceability, and trying to give a kind of an out-of-box thought process in bringing in that sustainability-driven circularity aspect into the business component. So that's something which is required from utility standpoint. I won't be staying much on this particular slide, but it talks about what all one should do under understanding and then reducing the scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions. So first foremost thing is like one needs to first quantify or should know how to quantify scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. Who are those who actually are contributing to these significant values? So first is understanding the relevant data where it resides and extracting that data to derive important insightful values in terms of quantifying my impact comes under scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, one thing. Second, sustainability comes with a kind of an KPIs which are environmental KPIs. In yesterday's session, if you remember, in the last session, we had a wonderful discussion about nuclear power station. And in that nuclear power station or nuclear power capacity as a kind of a generation ability, if you see, then there are, it demonstrates a significant contribution in terms of low loss, low carbon, high energy intensity, etc. It means the way manufacturing industries, they have to focus on certain specific KPIs, utility industry also have to certainly focus on specific sustainability KPIs like GHG, like human toxicity, like biodiversity, like ecological imbalance, water usage, land usage, and of course there are some other materiality driven impacts and KPIs also. So each vertical demands for strategic action and a roadmap to achieve decarbonization, to achieve minimization of loss, leakage, etc., and explore the opportunity in circular business, etc. Now again, as per decarbonization is concerned, for last day, we have deliberated a lot in terms of how digitalization is playing critical role in extracting data to you. Question is how effectively we are using that data. So understand the opportunities of decarbonization in my entire landscape and what are different possible, feasible, economically and technically viable options pertaining to which geo you belong to. And that's one of the reasons while decarbonizing your system, you really need to first quantify as its status and understand where do we reside, what is our starting point. And if we see this McKinsey's report, in this McKinsey's report they have presented certain possible ways of decarbonization which are very, very ambitious options and opportunities. However, as I said, based on what is your status, how much carbon you reside on, you need to take up all these decisions of carbon capture, utilization, rather than having an option of, say, storage. Similarly, so many other options of decarbonization. But over here, as a technical person, I really want to present another viewpoint of looking at decarbonization. It's like whenever decarbonization term comes in our mind, renewable is something which is a kind of an analogous word to decarbonization. However, the moment I talk about renewable and more penetration of renewable into grid certainly increases a lot of operational challenges to the operator who is actually handling system security, reliability, stability of that particular grid where there is large amount of penetration of renewable because of low inertia that is there getting injected by renewable. So the moment I focus on decarbonization, there are two sides of a coin. On one side, I have to be there focusing on operational excellence. On another side, I have to try to evacuate more and more in terms of green power. Now, second opportunity is about bringing in traceability and circularity. This is something which is very naive, which is at a very basic level, and this basic level is a kind of a status at globe. This is something where we have to come together, think out of box and try to create that circular business, circular economy, and actual circularity and reusability, refurbishment, and an opportunity to remanufacture certain components, materials, supply chain, etc., so that we will try to create that closed loop system in increasing the life cycle of the material, life cycle of the asset, life cycle of the system, life cycle of the process also. That's exactly what is honestly required if we really want to sustain and long last. And the last point is about the opportunities towards materiality driven insights, where we have to give emphasis to environment, we have to give emphasis to people, we have to give emphasis to safety, and most important is affordability. The cost of power to be purchased is important from the point of view of a customer, and again, what kind of business avenue that you have, what kind of portfolio that you take care, you really have hands-on data. Now, that data could be structured data, unstructured data, but believe me, you do have data. The challenge in this case is orchestration of data and then consolidation of that data across your systems and departments, and then derive some sort of insightful extracts out of this data consolidation, so that you will be able to achieve what you want to achieve. And this particular slide, which is the last slide, which talks of different reporting and compliances, where global industry, they are following certain reporting and compliance regulatory bodies, where we have GRI, we have SBTI, we have TCFD, we have SASB, CDP, and I'm very sure in coming years you will find again amalgamation of all these regulatory compliances together to make it more and more holistic and make utility business value to quantify KPIs just now what are there mentioned on the screen. So here with this, I do conclude with my point of view. Thank you very much for giving this opportunity to present my view. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sureka. You covered a lot of ground in really talking about like what are the different entry points and different segments that every utility player has to focus on to really be sustainable in a wholesome sense. And I really liked that, again, in the running theme of what Mr. Bhargav started, that we need to have frameworks that allow you to measure, quantify, and then stick to the targets that you're setting for yourself. And on that note, let me invite Mr. Marcus Merkel actually to, because he comes from EWE, which is already a company that has clear targets, and they have used the science-based target initiative to talk to us about how they're actually approaching these frameworks, and how are they actually measuring, what are the systems in-house they have to make sure that there's someone round the clock who's on it and helping your utility to deliver on the promises you've made. Thank you.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen. So it's my first time now after COVID. I'm very happy to be in India again. So my fourth time in total. I will not, let's say, talk too much about, let's say, figures, but more about how we as a utility, because my company I'm working for, I'm now senior strategy manager for the EVE group. So maybe two figures to EVE, turnover 5.5 billion, a workforce of 10,000, and we are 4 strategy managers guiding the company through this transition. This transition, of course, needs ambitious climate action. And as you said, net zero 2070 sounds far away. But utilities can make a change already now. And that's what I would pledge for. It sounds 2070 sounds far away, but we don't have the time as utilities, because we need to enable the change and support electrification in many areas. And I love especially this one here, sustainable transformation of utilities. That's at the core what it's all about. Okay, I will start with, let's say, a little bit international context, very short. Because my clock is running. Approved science targets were already mentioned. This is the method we stick to as a group because we think it's a wonderful work the group has done. A little bit about our scoping and targets. You can read afterwards, after my presentation, maybe look in the figures, in the detailed figures of our group. You will find the emissions and the KPIs and so on. I think that's not really the need to discuss now, because compared to many other utilities here in India, EVE is comparable, small, with 2.5 million customers. The SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, were, let's say, the first step into our assessment of sustainability. A wonderful work, took 20 years to bring it up in 2015. And goal 13 is about climate change. And have a look, for example, this is the example of SDG goal 13. UN asked us to take urgent action to combat climate change and its impact. It's not a question, we have to take action. The science-based target approach, the initiative of CDP, WWF, World Resources Institute, 4,500 companies in the world have already taken action based on this initiative. A wonderful initiative, and I'm very proud that our group in 2022 was validated according to our targets. And I will not go into the details, but we committed to be climate neutral in scope 1 and 2 in 2035. So that's 35 years earlier than you plan to have it in whole India. So it's ambitious. And you can read now the concrete wording of our targets, where we have publicly committed to as a group. This is very important. Commitment. And our mission, according to this commitment, is not only to have 4 sustainability managers in the group taking action and take care of this journey. We think make climate protection doable today, tomorrow, for generations. And this climate neutral future, we prepare for our kids. Yeah, that's what we do for the next generation. So this task is something which I think is incredibly ambitious. And what this needs, of course, is then companies being responsible. Here you can see the scoping of EVE Group, for example, scope 1, the direct emissions. It was all mentioned before. What is important is that you take, as a utility, responsibility over the whole value chain when it comes to scopes 3, because this are the consumers consuming your energy. And depending on what you put in, shit out, yeah, there will occur problems according to emissions. This is my last slide. I will show two little more, but this is the scoping of our group, and there you can see on the scope 3, we have the target to provide 65% green products to our customers. 65%. So that means, of course, there will be still some old products in our pockets, but there's a huge transformation in it. EWE in scope 1 and 2 will become climate neutral in 2035. And with regard to our procurement, we have committed in scope 3 to have 50% green procurement. This is just an illustration because on the down slide you see that the most important action has to be taken in scope 3. These are the consumers. This is the consumer side. These are the concrete figures. I will not go into detail. We have achieved some exceptional performance things according to CO2 emissions. I indicate here. You can have a look in the detailed figures how we shift from fossil fuel, coal-fired generation to renewables. And the summary I would like to give is that climate neutrality as corporate target is extremely ambitious. So is the challenge of the 21st century to combat global warming. But it's doable. It needs joint effort of all players. Top players in the market need to take the lead now, whether it's in India or in Germany. There's already strong regulatory and political support. Investors push for green investment, so the environment for the transition is perfect. For EWE, we have identified 17 actions, and we are on our way. Join us to fight global warming as utility and start your activities now. There will be no better now in the future. And this is a little slide which was drawn by a kid, which we used, let's say, in our communication always, and we here now. And it's up to you to decide when you will be climate neutral. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much for a very inspiring address, Mr. Merkel. It's heartening to know that you have such ambitious and progressive targets by 2035, and and I resonate with your thoughts that of course top players in every country should start acting now and have more near-term targets. But also I hope that more players, and not just the top players in countries like Germany, are as ambitious as yours, so that it also gives more carbon space for the developing countries. And we will also hear from a representation from Kenya, because we also have very diverse stages of development that countries are at, and they have priorities to grow as well. So let me invite Mr. Charles, actually, it's a small correction. So Mr. Charles Mwara is filling in for Mr. Bashira, and he works at Kenya Power. So very briefly, I mean, if you can talk to us about, if you've heard a perspective from India, you've heard how a German utility is approaching the energy transition. What does German energy transition mean to you? What are your national priorities? And how are you, balancing the here and now needs of providing access to your people and leapfrogging to clean sources? So over to you. Yeah. You can go there and make your intervention. Thank you.
Thank you and good afternoon. Yes, I'm Charles Mwara from Kenya. I work for the utility called Kenya Power and Lighting Company. I'm a general manager in charge of network operations. I'm here to represent a permanent secretary who was here but left. So I don't have a presentation, but I'll just go briefly as I've been guided on what we are doing in Kenya. Kenya is a country in Africa, in the eastern of Africa. We have a population of about 45 million people, and we are still a developing country, as has been stated. The organization I work for, Kenya Power and Lighting Company, has been in existence for 100 years. Last year we celebrated our 100th year. So we have had power distribution, transmission, and generation for that long, but in a small scale. Currently, our installed capacity is about 3.3 gigawatts. Compared to India, we are just a baby. And we have a demand of about 2.2 gigawatts. So the journey we have moved on. Slightly before, the past years before 1990s, we were relying mainly on hydro generation, which was adequate considering the capacity which was there then. But as time goes on, we have increased the connectivity, and currently we are about 70% connectivity. So our first of the target, the country is targeting connectivity as a means of enabling the people and ensuring that they are using clean energy at homes, especially in use of lighting, where you use paraffin lamps, then you should be able to give access to electricity. Also encourage in terms of cooking, so that we are able to save the trees and make sure that we have a sustainable environment. So the government has a policy, a clear roadmap to ensure that we have connected, we are at 100% connectivity by 2028. So currently we are at 70%, and we are sure that we should be able to achieve that target. In terms of power generation, as I said earlier, we started with hydros. Then as the demand grew, we were not able to sustain it, and also issues to do with the drought. So around 1990s, 2000, we had a massive load shedding because the water was not adequate because of the climate change. And finally, we had to install thermal generation, which was to come in and fill the gap. And the thermal generation was mainly from HFOs, and it was mainly private sector driven because they came in to put the gap. The utility is both more or less more government owned by the private sector, over 50% is government owned, but the private sector invests in generation. So those damos had contracts of about 25 years, 30 years, and still they are now coming out of the system. So after that experience, the government we embarked on ensuring that we have now a drive not to rely only on hydro generation, but rely on more cleaner energy sources. And we embarked heavily on geothermal exploration and the geothermal installation of power plants. So going forward, in a nutshell, I'll just give a brief. Currently, we have more geothermal generation than hydro. Generation now constitutes about 30% of our generation, power supply. 25% is hydro. And recently now we have embarked on wind generation, which is about another 15%, and also solar generation, which is about 6%. In addition, to ensure that we are moving towards clean energy, we are also importing power from neighboring countries. We are connecting with Ethiopia, and we are connecting with Tanzania. So from Ethiopia, we are getting power from hydros through HVDC system, so that we are not able to go back to thermal generation. So the roadmap is, as we go on and we retire thermal generation, which are about 25 years, we don't put back thermal generation. So I would say that we are proud as a country that currently we are at 90% green energy. We only supply 10% from the thermos. And at off-peak, that is from 10 to morning, we are 100% green. So we are not using we have totally decarbonized dispatch of power from that time. So I would say, as a country, we are on the right foot. We are moving forward, and considering that we have put steps that going forward as we industrialize, as we get more investors, we are also opened up in terms of generation investors so that we can be able to put up more plants. But as they come in to invest, the condition is that they need to come in with the green energy. We still have challenges, as the speakers have said, because of variability, variable renewable energy in terms of solars and winds. And there's a business opportunity, and also from the investors like this conference. We have talked about battery storage, but I think we need to go much further because that variability is what actually keeps some of those thermal plants because of the kicking energy within a short period. So I think with that, I would maybe add there. It was just, I didn't have a precision, but I think I maybe have answered. We have had experience from India, experience from Germany, but I would say in terms of greening the power source, I think we are ahead of India. Maybe we could be just behind Germany. And we are sure that by 2030, we should be 100% green. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you so much. Very heartening to know already, and which is why. I would like to add, Kenya is also, famous for the kind of innovative ecosystem it provides to many players, and the concept of pay as you go for, solar microgrids, or for solar irrigation and for electric cooking. A lot of innovation actually sprouting from Kenya and to other countries in Africa as well. So thank you for sharing your experience with us. Let me now turn to Mr. Pramod Singh, who comes from India Power Company Limited, again a company which has very ambitious targets, and the way it's it's present in different segments of the industry, from generation to distribution. To share your company's vision, what targets do you have, and if you would also like to speak about how, again in the context of India, what kind of sort of regulatory or policy changes could help you be more ambitious? Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, colleagues. My deep appreciation to World Utility Forum for organizing such a important event in terms of the topic that we want to cover. Being the last of the speaker has certain advantages, and I would like to certainly grab that with both hands. A lot of areas of thoughts which I had thought is more eloquently covered by my earlier speakers. So I'll stick to the script that Ms. Shalu had given me to see it from a lens of a distribution utility in terms of how a sustainable practice and energy transition, how are we trying to cope up with this, and what are the things. But just to introduce first in terms of my affiliation, I'm from India Power Corporation. Now it's a distribution utility in West Bengal, covering districts of Asansol, Durgapur, etc. For my foreign colleagues, just to kind of give you a sense of geography, it would be around 1,200 kilometers from where we are sitting here on the eastern side of the country. We are more than 100 years old. We just celebrated our 104th birthday a week back. We talk about sustainable practices. Utility at the outset has to be sustainable, and you will find these kind of a situation in most of the places. So we are one of them who have survived this thing, and to that extent, I must kind of add and agree with what Mr. Bhargav said. Our work continues to be to keep the light on. Gas, a decarbonized thermal fleet, which is more benign to environment, or renewable mainstreaming. But the fact of the matter is, from a distribution utility perspective, sustainable practice means how do we address to affordability, availability, and accessibility to the places that we serve, to the customer that we address to in terms of their overall power and energy need. And it's very important in a sense that, from an ecosystem perspective, if you look at our area of service, you will find that 80% of our load are to the hard-to-abate sector in terms of steel, cement, coal mining, and others. So basically there, in terms of energy transition, getting the green power back to the last mile is something which is very, very important. And that's one work that we have envisioned ourselves to do that. Some 3 years back, we were hardly 1% of the power in terms of green. Now, as we speak today, it is more than 25%. And we have a stated corporate objective to reach to 70% of our overall power basket in terms of our sourcing from renewable. And to that extent, this could be one of the I suppose, a benchmark milestone in terms of how we want to embrace. And this is by 2024 and not 2030. So to that extent, we have a journey in terms of sustainability in a way that we embrace renewable, clean tech, looking at a lot of, in fact, some 12 years back, the area that we have is not a renewable rich state or a region. So to that extent, most of the renewable, large one at that, are imported from outside. But 10 years back, we kind of had a partnership with one of the key stakeholders from a government side and developed a 2 megawatt solar plant 10 years back. And now we are renewing the PPA in terms of having seen the life cycle of the project. So to that extent, having embedded generation, a decentralized distributed generation regime is something that we also look at in terms of our way to support the sustainability drive. In terms of RPO as a distribution utility, this is something which binds us in terms of how do we look at promoting renewable. And one of the regulatory metrics and parameter is how do you what is the target that you have on the renewable purchase obligation and how well you are doing. And there are incentives and disincentives structure which are attached to it. And to that extent, if you look at last 4-5 years, we have been on course in terms of the target. We are also mindful of the fact that you have a national RPO target which basically extends to 43%, upward of 43% by 2030. And to that extent, as I said, that we are making all our attempt and action to see that it gets, like Mr. Bhagat talked about the target getting met by 2021 itself, measurable, kind of demonstrable, and looking at how do we meet that. So basically, we are looking at 2024 to look at beating that particular kind of a milestone. Distribution is a difficult business globally in terms of the stubbornness of cost structure. 80% of more than 80% of your cost is linked to power purchase. Rest 15-20% is fixed cost. Very rigid to that extent that you can only do this much and no more, RPI minus X. So some efficiency gain, kind of setting it off with inflation factors. So to that extent, all this what we are talking about in terms of our sustainable kind of purchase is something which is also merit based. So we're looking at how do we remain competitive. We are working in a parallel license scenario, colleagues, which basically means where we are serving, we have 3 set of operators. And, to that extent, I'm so happy to see, report that consumers have choices there in terms of choosing any one of the operator. And to that extent, other than being competitive, if you are sustainable, if you are, if you are green centric, it do carry a lot of meaning in terms of your array of competitive offering that you can do. Having said that, we have challenges. We are learning in the process. We are mindful of the fact that, and Mr. Baba is here, and some of the supports we are always taking from the grid operators on a regional basis and others, in terms of looking at a lot of challenge in terms of our intermittency. If you step into our control room and look at the operator, you will find that there are far too many things that are happening at that particular operating level than what used to be some few years back, which basically points out to the fact that as a utility, sustainable practice also means how do we extend institutional capacity building measures in our operating format. How do we look at, revisit our SOPs and make it more sustainable in terms of these challenges? We have seen, for example, and some of the colleagues I see who would resonate with this. In terms of the deviation settlement mechanism itself, the type of yo-yoing which is happening in this particular area for last 2 months is something which is basically learning and unlearning and trying to kind of cope up with these situations. I would also say that in terms of our operating domain, we are also learning the process from an era of managing deficit. We are now trying to see how do we kind of manage the surpluses, and surpluses more meaningfully, gainfully, to see that our tariff remains manageable. We have had policy and regulatory benefits, and I must appreciate that. So as I said, most of our power is exported from outside our distribution area and state, because you have renewable rich states where, and so we are benefited by transmission charges, waiver, and others. And also we have some of the benefits coming through a strong counterparty like SECI and others. So our PP and others are also tied up with this kind of situation. Grid of the future, as a sustainable utility practice, we believe that is one who would be responsive to these changing way of doing business, and to that extent, we are gearing up to that. I'll stop here in the interest of time, and I must thank everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Singh, for sharing with us again how you are setting up targets, say, to make your energy portfolio greener to 70% very soon. And hearing from different panelists that we have, we see, I mean, we are probably up for a competition on how we can set more ambitious targets among utility players. And that'll be a really, inspiring competition. And I hope that in the next round of the World Utility Summit, when we have more such players, we have newer faces on this front and more ambitious targets with actual delivery on those. And before we close, I want to come back to all the panelists to just ask just one last comment from you side. In one line, if you could sum up that, okay, what is the key takeaway you want the audience from here to take from what you shared? This is a more difficult ask, but it could be one message that you want them to go away with. So I'll just pass on the mics, and we can start from here. Would you want to go?
Yes. I think my key takeaway is that all of us from different backgrounds, different countries, we all realize that it's important to have a sustainable source of power supply and environment, decarbonize the energy sector, so that we can also have sustainable environment in terms of carbon pollution. But the issue is how to do it and how fast. So I think all of us is now how to agree on the steps so that we are specific, and the targets should be more stressing than just to believe everybody at their own time. Thank you.
Thank you. One line, please.
One line is always very difficult, but
Two. Okay, two.
Thank you so much. No, but I actually don't have a message for anyone. It's probably all of us are very learned individuals sitting in this room. So the simple thing to do is whatever we do, we need to hold ourselves accountable. It's not for a company like NTPC or for a country like Kenya alone. It's everyone's job to do whatever they have to do to ensure that we leave the planet a better place, because all these climate change activities are not going to wait, they are happening. We can only take steps to maybe delay them and leave the world a better place. So that's all I need to say.
Thank you. Dr. Surekha?
One line, yes. So be the change that you want to see in the world. That's one liner. Takeaway of this.
Thank you, Dr.
Do
Surekha.
what is correct. That's important to save climate, Mother Earth. Thank you.
Yeah, take the methods which are there to start the sustainable transformation of utilities. Don't be afraid, just start now.
Don't be afraid, start now. Yes.
So I think we are all fortunate to be at the right place at the right time. My only other input would be that this is just the start of a transformation. Tighten up your seat belt. We will have a lot of tailwinds and headwinds coming our way, which we have to navigate and maneuver effectively. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And with this, we wrap this session. We probably have 5 minutes. Thanks to all our panelists for being on time. So we can take probably 1 or 2 questions from the audience if there are any. Yes, we have. But please be specific. We want questions. They should be small questions, and someone can pass on the mic to them. Great. And we will take 1 or 2 questions together, and then we'll respond to them. So if any others have questions, just raise your hand so that we can identify you.
I have a question for Mr. Mohit Bhargava. I am working for the development of my village invisibly and without publicity. Suppose the consumption of power in my village is 2 megawatt. In case we produce solar energy to the extent of 4 megawatt, can we say that it is a net zero, that we have achieved net zero target in our village? We have a PNG in every household also. It is a big village.
Thank you for the question. So you're asking how do we make villages net zero, basically?
No, I am asking if we produce solar energy to the extent of 4 megawatt in our village with our own funds or borrowed funds or subsidy provided by the MNRE, can we say that our village has achieved net zero target?
Very good question. We'll come back to this. Any other questions from the audience? Then, okay, let's deliberate on this one. Mr. Bhargava, do you want to start?
I think, sir, your point is very valid, and all I can say right now is this is something the government is also grappling with, because India has a different definition, and which we hope to finalize shortly. Europe, for example, has a different definition of how you define net zero. I'll not say net zero. Net zero is something I mentioned earlier. It's still to be defined properly. But whether if you produce 4 megawatts, your consumption is 2. So because you're pumping in electrons worth 4 megawatts and your total requirement is equivalent to 4 megawatts, you'll be considered green. Logically, what you say is right, but on a different level of accounting standards, it is not being accepted as of now. But we believe that this is a question which needs to be answered quickly, because this will in part address the issue of variability. Because we cannot have, as of now, renewables across the 24 hours. So there has to be ways and means. Right now, if you pump 4 megawatt into the grid, draw only 2 megawatt, it is not accepted as being green. But many people are trying. There's a concept known as banking. So people are trying to say that if I consume 2 megawatt, bank another 2 megawatt, and I draw another 2 megawatt at the night, I should be considered green. But this is a thing which has to be settled.
Thank you so much. Do you want to, Marcus, respond on like how would you respond to this question back in Germany if this were asked to you? You have the mic there.
Yeah, I think the methods, especially with regard to net zero, the SBTI is providing here a perfect, I think, method how you bring a company to or a corporation towards net zero in their framing. And I think over 500 companies have already committed to the net zero targets. Normally they are going towards 2050. But I think here it's a question really of the method and the framework, and I agree what was said. There are a lot of definitions, let's say, surrounding in the market. Maybe stick to this SBTI, that's what would my recommendation be.
I would like to add one point to what Marcus has explained on to, as per SBTI is concerned. Now, right now, SBTI is there mandated for enterprises, companies. However, you gave a very best example of a community initiative. So I strongly feel that vice versa, the way we have prosumer and the presence of prosumer and a contribution of prosumer, the way it is getting acknowledged, the way example of your village could be the one to even think of giving this privilege and an opportunity to such villages to set targets under SBTI and some sort of other reporting infrastructures to get themselves counted. And that can be done because anyway this is an evolving process. That's the biggest advantage. We are in this particular phase of evolution and a change. And this would be, like you, there are definitely good amount of examples which are community examples. And they should be heard. This is what I feel, strongly feel. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So with that, we end on the note of inclusivity. Oh, we have one more question, sorry. Okay, this is the last question we are taking.
Can you throw some insight on green hydrogen? How would actually transition our entire world's journey towards net zero?
Actually to
Actually,
deliberate
some highlights like
I think we can take that on, offline
on a crisp
bilateral
crystal.
basis.
If you can share your insights, it will be great.
Yeah, we'll take that question bilaterally. Definitely, you should catch up with the panelists. But thank you so much for your attention and time, everyone who are with us. And special thanks to all our panelists, the keynote and the special addressee. And it was a pleasure to be speaking to you all. Thank you.
Thank you. It was indeed a great session with a lot of learnings. And now I request Mr. Vikram Gandotra to please bring Mr. KVS Baba, ex-former CMD POSOCO, to hand over mementos to our esteemed panelist. To Ms. Shalu Agarwal. To Mr. former, your name, sir? Mr. Charles. Keynote, sir. Dr. Surekha Deshmukh. Mr. Marcus. And Mr. Pramod. We'll have a group photograph. Sir? Sir, for a group photograph, please. Group photograph.